What's up, everybody, and welcome to the Mamaverse Podcast, where we bring experts in physical, emotional, mental, and spiritual wellness to talk about how moms can improve their overall health in their daily life. I'm your host, Tu Hien Lee, and our guest today is my friend Robert Hull, who is a pain specialist trainer who helps frustrated men and women who think they've tried everything live pain-free lives. What's up, Robert?
Hi, Tu. Thanks for having me.
Thanks for joining us on the Mamaverse podcast. So, Robert, why don't you tell us a little bit about your background and how you got into, being a trainer and specializing in pain?
Yeah. So I guess we could go all the way back to 2008. I was a mere 5'6" and 240 pounds, and I decided to take part in athletic activities that I should not be taking part in when you weigh that much. And I sprained my ankle, and I had this thought to myself that maybe if I didn't weigh so much, that wouldn't have happened to me. And so that began what was basically a nearly 100-pound weight loss journey over the course of the next year. And so that kind of spiraled into all this fitness stuff, not so much nutrition, but definitely the fitness part, and got into stuff like CrossFit, decided to become a trainer, started to coach at a local gym part-time. And at that point, I was going to school to be a teacher. And I still maintain to this day that coaching adults is more enjoyable than teaching children, but they are to a degree the same. And then a couple of years down the road, kind of doing some competitive CrossFit stuff by nature, I hurt myself. I had a massive lower back disc herniation, and as I was going through that process, I ended up hiring my own coach. And one of the things that really stuck with me, being a gym owner at that time, was I want to make sure that I could either prevent this from happening with my clients, my friends, my family, or if anybody is in the same scenario as me. And thankfully, I haven't encountered anybody who had such a dramatic experience, that I would be able to help them. And so the coach that I worked with, I got in contact with that company. I ended up going to their in-person workshops. I did their coaches training online. And then just this past month, I finished the highest level of education that they have, which is the Active Life Professional, which was about 14 months of pretty intense work on not only just communicating effectively to people what I do, but also breath work and how we can use the central nervous system to accept what it is that we're doing, sales and marketing, orthopedic work, navigating the healthcare system. So taking into consideration things like people who have COPD, people who have type 1 or type 2 diabetes, people who have like markers that might indicate that they have heart disease, and also being able to build a team around me, whether it's the person's primary care doctor, a physical therapist, a chiropractor, an orthopedic surgeon, and having all of those people kind of at my fingertips to not only refer out to, but to be able to get second opinions from should I feel that somebody falls outside of my scope. So that is basically how we got to where we are right now. The biggest definitely influence was what had happened to me personally.
Yeah. Wow. So let me back up here. Did you lose 100 pounds in 1 year?
Yeah, pretty much. So that was the biggest things were not that I didn't care about my health. I was active as a kid. I played soccer for 13 years, but growing up, I thought it would just be really cool one day to be able to eat as much food as my father did. Well, my father's like 6 feet and 160 pounds, and so he can consume and should consume more food than me. And that's still something that kind of sticks with me today. I generally will overeat if left to my own devices. And but that was just really simple stuff. Like I stopped drinking milk. I stopped drinking orange juice. I stopped eating bread. And it wasn't like, oh, I had a glass of orange juice with breakfast. It was like two or three glasses of milk with dinner, like half to an entire loaf of bread. And it wasn't stuff I was conscious about, but when I decided that I wanted to lose weight, I was like, I need to, general prescription. I need to restrict the calories that I'm taking in, and I need to work out more. And then even though I was 20, I didn't drink alcohol for like 9 months until my 21st birthday, and even then it was still a limited intake. My first year of college, I did not do that.
Wow. Okay. So wait, are you dairy free now and gluten
I'm
free?
Yes, that's a really good question. So I am most certainly not either of those. However, it's one of those things where it's just not in my household. So me and my wife, the closest thing we'll get is kind of like Greek yogurt, and even then, it's like an addition to a smoothie that's got like carrots and protein and strawberries and bananas in it. Um, don't really keep bread in our household either, and it's easy the way we eat. There's a lot of fresh food. We go to, this might sound like really cliche, but we go to the local farmers market like every week, but that's where we buy the majority of our fruits and vegetables. We actually try to stay out of the grocery store. And it's a big part of like what my wife does with regards to making and preparing our meals. And I'm not
I
going to
hear
argue
she's
with her.
awesome. I hear she's awesome
Yes.
at it. You're lucky.
She's really good at it, and I definitely would struggle and probably spend a lot more money if I didn't have her.
No, I hear you. I hear you. So let's talk about pain, Robert. You're all
Yes,
about
that's
talking about pain. I know you're working with many clients and specifically around this. Can you like share some insights as to what a lot of these clients are experiencing with pain and how you're helping them navigate through it?
Sure. Yeah. So the first thing I usually do when I have somebody who comes to me who is having pain, and the first thing I'll kind of want to know is how long they've been dealing with it and what they've tried to fix it. Because sometimes there's a lot of people who, and it doesn't happen too often, but I might be their first stop in the road, and it would behoove them to maybe like try some stuff on their own. Now, some people are going to want to, cut straight to the chase, which is great. But there is a degree of want that accompanies most of the people that work with me. They've gotten to a place where they're just really frustrated, or they've tried everything, and which kind of stinks because the medical system, or what is usually thought to be correct or most appropriate by somebody who's in front of you in a white coat who has paid lots of money to go to medical school, is that they should be able to help me. And the reality is they should, but, and we can get into the weeds if we want, the medical system was developed to triage and be reactive rather than preventative. And trying to change that, it's like trying to stop a train in place. So the first thing we kind of sit down and we talk about is just like the things that they've tried. And one of the things that really hits home for me is I want to know what it affects in their life. So with somebody like you and somebody like me, we're in the gym, and that's where our normal interaction happens. And so if somebody has pain when they're doing something like a push-up, that doesn't bug me. What bugs me is if that has a trickle effect into the 23 hours of their day that they spend outside of the gym. Or for some people, it's even more because they don't work out as often. They work out maybe 2 or 3 times a week. So if this person has pain pulling dishes off the shelf to make food for their family, or if it's a parent who has to say no to their kid to play because their back hurts, their hip hurts, or even in a more general sense, they're out of breath. Like I really feel for that person, and that motivates me to want to help them. And then from there, it's really a process of going through what we call a movement assessment, which we start to look at things like flexibility and mobility. And then one of the biggest things that I'll actually talk to people about is evaluating how well they sleep, what kind of stress they have in their life, whether it's good or bad, and then their diet. And of those two things, stress and sleep, I will address more. Diet, I will typically refer out because I know a little bit about it, but if it needs to be a more dialed in, we have not only coaches here at our gym, but I have coaches that I have access to that I'll get help with clients when needed.
So you kind of touched upon it, which I wanted to ask you more about, the stress audit. Stress is Well, it's prevalent in everybody's lives. And when you're talking about parents that they're taking on, not only the things that they have to do for their career and lives, but also taking care of other humans, little kids too. So how do you like go about addressing or discussing the stress audit?
Yeah, so a lot of times I'll have people it'll seem like the pain is coming on very suddenly, or what we would refer to as acute. Like it's only really happened in maybe like the last 2 weeks. But most of us now know, and when I talk with these clients and we kind of look back at everything that's going on, it was kind of something that was always going on under the surface. So the first thing we talk about with these people is kind of like their body's ability or capacity to do something. So if we think about this in weightlifting terms, it's really easy. Let's say two can push 100 pounds over her head. If I put 101
Which I
pounds,
can't, but
that's okay. It's a great example. We're going to say you can put 100 pounds over your head. If we put 101 pounds on the bar, you're not going to be able to do it. And if we take it down and it's now 99 pounds, you are going to be able to do it. And so that's a yes or a no. In the pain world, that 101 is what we would call a problem, and the 99 is what we call not a problem. And there's a lot of factors that go into this, but one thing that can really easily affect our capacity is stress. Stress is going to add load to our central nervous system, whether we're aware of it or not. And your body has a hard time telling, and almost impossible time telling, the difference between good and bad stress. And so that's something really important to remember. If you're doing the same workout routine 3 days a week and you're fine, but now you have a big project at work, somebody quit and now you have to take on that additional load, and they told you they were going to replace the person in 2 weeks, but it hasn't happened yet, that's going to build, and we're going to look at that time frame. And a lot of times that's one of the things the first thing I'll ask people, also say, have you dealt with any additional stress at work in the past 2 weeks? And usually the first thing somebody will do is laugh, because the answer to somebody like me is really important, but I've never had a typical job in my entire life. And so for them to go, oh yeah, work's always stressful, it's kind of like, okay, so how much of this do we have control over, and how much can we like take away and change? Because a lot of times that is the thing that will affect somebody, the normal individual who isn't an athlete, way more than their flexibility, their mobility, their strength balances, and things like that. So looking at that, looking at, family life, relationships, like all really like pertinent questions. And, I'll ask people, are you comfortable discussing this first? And if they are, then we'll start getting into those things, because maybe their kid isn't sleeping well. Maybe it's, they're going through something with husband, wife, partner, whatever.
Yeah, that's really interesting. I like that approach. That is a more holistic approach. It's not just like my shoulder hurts, let's just start lifting. It's like, well, what else is going on in your life? And the funny thing is the more I'm talking to different people in wellness, I'm finding that a lot of the things are more holistic. Like it's not just what you think it is. It's stress seems to be a big factor in a lot of things that are happening in the body that could manifest into pain, right? So I think and sleep. I think that you're right. Those are like huge things. Yeah. So you kind of touched on this a little bit earlier about the whole medical system and it being what you said, reactive versus proactive.
Yeah. Yep.
I know you got thoughts on this.
Well, I think most people, when they sit and they think about it, would agree with it. If your arm gets cut off, it is not a good idea to come and see me. You need to go to the emergency room and get it fixed. Like it's like if someone is drowning, the wrong thing to do is to give them swimming lessons. Give them a life preserver and get them out. So the medical system has its place, and it is really good at those things like stitches, getting the acute swelling down, all of those things, emergency surgeries. But if somebody has type 2 diabetes, the medical system goes, okay, so let me write you a prescription to manage that. That person is not going to get cured of their diabetes by taking the medication. And of course, a primary care provider is going to make recommendations about their diet or possibly exercise. But the problem is that there's very rarely, if any, follow-up and accountability with that. Similarly, with respect to stuff like back pain, one of the most debilitating, and back pain's one example. We can talk about shoulder pain as well. One of the
I think
most
back
debilitating
pain is so common. Is so common, especially in women after having kids. I feel like it's very common, or just people who
and
sit a lot for their jobs too.
and I can't remember the number off the top of my head, but I think lower back pain costs the US about $900 million in healthcare a year. And I might be messing that up and it might be billions. So I've opted to go on the low end. And one of the most common things with regards to back pain is fixing it or surgery. This now has a phenomenon. It's called failed back surgery syndrome. 1 in 5 back surgeries are actually successful. That's a 20% success rate. And very often that is not on the first surgery. That's a multiple surgery scenario. Which, and I hear all this stuff, and I don't interact with a lot of people who have had back surgery in particular. I do have one client, but I was sitting in a restaurant the other day and my wife and I were paying, and I heard this old guy sit down and talking to whoever he was, and he just randomly went off about, he's like, never get back surgery. I've had it twice and it hasn't fixed anything. And we just kind of looked at ourselves across the table, and I was just like, this is why I do what I do. Like, I would like for somebody like that to know what I do so I could help them, so they aren't feeling like I've tried everything and now surgery is the only option.
So when you're working with clients and they're taking more of like a preventative approach to their back pain, so they have back pain and then coming to you and saying, Robert, help me, help me not have back pain. What is your methodology? Is it like starting to just start lifting, more stretching?
No, that's a really good question. So, and we could talk about at the end of the show, I have a really good kind of like a step-by-step process on my Instagram page of what happens when someone starts with me. And we can do a really quick breakdown. So the first thing we start with is a movement screen. So head to toe flexibility and mobility. If somebody has a back issue, I'm still going to look at their shoulders and stuff like that. If somebody has a shoulder issue, I'm still going to look at their lower body because it all matters. After that, we'll do one of two things. If the client has fairly low levels of pain and has experience to a degree exercising, we'll go into what's called strength testing. So this is going to be a numbers-driven approach. And for people who are familiar with exercise, I'll give you an example. Let's say you can deadlift, and you can deadlift. We'll just use 100 pounds because the math is easy. You then should be able to back squat 85 pounds. So there's an 85% squat to deadlift ratio.
I didn't know that.
And you know what? A lot of people don't. And for me, it's like really common. And what's funny about that number is it doesn't usually tell much of a story at all. It's the other stuff that we do. I'll give you another example. Let's say you weigh 150 pounds and you can do 10 strict pull-ups, which is great. You should then be able to take a third of your body weight, which is 50 pounds, in one hand and press it over your head 10 times on each arm. Similarly, you should be able to take that same 50 pounds and do what's called a strict upright row 10 times. That's what we call it's like perfect shoulder balance. Most of the time, nobody has that, and very few people who aren't painters or do drywall for a living can high pull that. And more often than not only will that number tell the story, but we're humans. One side's going to be stronger or weaker than the other. And if that gap is any more than 10%, there's a high correlation to closing that gap and that person who had shoulder pain, it going away. I actually saw a client this morning. I mean, just a huge discrepancy. And he was like, man, I knew my right side was stronger than my left side, but I didn't know it was that bad. And so and with him, it was like a 40% gap.
What does that mean though? So if you're saying there's like big strength discrepancies.
Yeah. So let's give a really good example of like why a strength discrepancy is a problem. Let's put you and I in a canoe in a river, and I'm going to paddle on the right and you're going to paddle on the left. I'm just going to stop paddling. It might take a while, or it might be really quick. We're going to run into the other side at some point. And so what can happen is, let's use your left side as the left arm. Two things can happen. One, we're pressing a bar, so both points are now connected, and the left side's pressing more than the right side. What can happen is the left side can just get used too much, overuse, and now we have like this, what became an ache is now pain, and the person's like, hey, I have pain on my left side and not on my right side. I don't know what's going on. If their left side's stronger than their right side, it can be overuse. The opposite can also happen. So let's say you're pressing your left side stronger than your right side and your right side hurts. Now it's a weakness thing. So weakness can also lead to pain. And there's not really, everybody is different. And that's one of the reasons like we'll always check, because chances are if there's a gap, regardless of which side hurts, closing the gap is going to usually be like part of the solution. And so you were talking about, sleep and stress, like being very holistic. If somebody has a flexibility issue and they have a strength discrepancy left to right, I'm never trying to fix one thing. I'm kind of trying to fix it all. So they might look back and go, well, what was the problem? Very few people care about what was wrong. What they care about most of all is, I don't want to feel like this anymore. I actually never got an MRI or any imaging done on my lower back after I got hurt. It was a physical therapist who I later saw and explained to my situation. She said, you likely had a disc herniation. I didn't have health insurance. I was freaking out about back surgery. I didn't want to get an MRI or pay for it. And at no point did I genuinely care what had happened to me. What I cared most of all is, how do I go back to being okay? And most people are in that same camp. Or they want it. And I understand a lot of people always want more information. They want a second opinion. And one of my favorite questions to ask people when they're like, I really just want to go ahead and get an MRI, I'll say, that's great. What do you hope to achieve with that information? And they usually don't know the answer. And a lot of times, and this is something that we've learned recently with our healthcare segment and our education, is that imaging can often be more mentally harmful for people than helpful. Because now they've heard this person who had a labrum tear in their shoulder and they had to get surgery. And so they think this person had the exact same problem I did and they got surgery. Well, that means that I'm going to get it too.
Okay. So going back to like the discrepancies between your right and left side, is that common that it could lead to like pain and injury?
So I will answer that two different ways. It's extremely common for people to have imbalances. It does not necessarily mean that you're going to have injury. And this is where like we can kind of also make a good little segue to over-diagnosing something and getting an opinion from a medical professional who tells you that it should be fixed. So let's take the disc herniation or bulge, which a lot of people will have back pain. An x-ray will get ordered and their chiropractor or their doctor will say, hey, listen, you have these discs bulging. The person now goes, okay, I have pain and I have a bulging disc. These two things are connected. Well, the question we then ask those people is there anybody out there in the entirety of human history who has had a bulging disc but not been in pain? And if they don't know the answer, that's okay. This is a little bit of a rigged question. The answer is yes. So what that means is if you have the same condition as someone else and they're not in pain, but you are, then that thing, that diagnosis is most likely not the root cause of your pain. And this is part of the problem is a lot of people will then think that they need to get disc replacement surgery or something of that nature. Well, it might not fix the problem because it's not connected to the problem at all. And so the same thing can be said for a strength imbalance. Somebody out there right now, and it's very, very common, could have a left to right discrepancy with upper body pressing strength and not have shoulder pain.
True. Okay. Ooh. And you know, we kind of talked about this earlier, how like when you get the diagnosis of, oh yeah, you got a bulging disc, then it's time for surgery. Well, that benefits the healthcare system and not necessarily the patient.
Well, let me be clear here. It's not really like the healthcare system is like out to get you. They're just doing what they have been taught and what they know and what has been commonly accepted. So for instance, with regards to MRIs, there was a survey done, and I'm going to underestimate the number again rather than overestimate it. at least half of all medical professionals order MRIs and X-rays simply out of fear of medical malpractice.
Mm-hmm.
Has nothing to do. It has nothing to do with they think it's actually going to help or they're going to get more information from it. It is, if this person has cancer in their spine and I didn't order the imaging, am I going to get sued because I didn't do everything I possibly could? And that is by far and away the biggest reason with respect to that, why a lot of it's the CYA, it's covering your ass.
Mm-hmm.
So
I mean, yeah, I get it. Well, it's kind of sad at the same time, but that's why I think we should, as a whole, need to like take more accountability for our own health, like holistically, not just what doctors say, but maybe do your research, right? And like understand what the options are. So for, the listeners that are out there, what's like a tip that you can give a mom who might be struggling with pain? Like what's one thing that they can do to start to address that and move towards a life of no pain?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I think the stress audit is probably the first one. So, if it's a new mom, like what's your support system like? And it's of course going to be different if you're a single mom and maybe family isn't close by and you have to work very hard to afford something like childcare. But maybe you have a little bit more support. You have a partner, you have family, and hopefully they want just as much for you as they want for their son or daughter, their grandchild, etc. So take advantage of that. And I hope I'm not talking to people who are just like me. I hope I'm talking to people who have hesitancy to ask for help. But I think that's kind of the first thing. The second one would be like, for me, with respect to what I do in my scope, movement is medicine. So like chances are something like surgery, like a steroid injection, like taking medication, a more passive approach is very, very rarely the answer. And you also want to think, okay, do you want to live with your pain and live with it suppressed, or do you actually want it to go away? Because if the answer is you actually want it to go away, then most of the time, if you're not actively involved in the process of getting out of your pain, there's a really good chance that it's not the best solution for you. And always feel like you can ask for a second opinion.
Yeah, I love those tips. So Robert, where can our listeners find you, connect with you, work with you?
Yeah. So the best way to get a hold of me, we will give them two options. So on Instagram, it's @ and it's all going to be lowercase, Robert Hull, HULL _coach. You can also, if you are local to St. Pete, or you want to just have a little bit easier way of getting hold of me rather than sending me a DM, you can look up Elevate St. Pete, which is Elevate STPETE.FIT, and then you can submit a form on our website that says that you're interested in pain-free work, and I'm going to be the person that you're going to be put in contact with. And then I work with people in person as well as remotely.
Awesome. So I encourage all the listeners to go and give Robert a follow, send him a DM, ask him your questions. He coaches me. I ask him tons of questions all the time, full of knowledge. Also, he's got some really entertaining reels too. So if you just want some entertainment and education at the same time, you got to follow Robert's Instagram. It's all good stuff. But thank you for joining us on the Mamaverse, Robert. It was fun. Yeah, we'll have to do this again. And to all the listeners, thank you for joining on this podcast episode, and we'll catch you on the next one.